theta plus 3 equals 0. So now looking at the 4 terms, I know I need to factor by grouping. So notice in these first 2 terms, they both have a 2, and they both have cosine of theta. So I'm going to take out a 2 cosine of theta. And I'm left with the 2's cancel, and cosine of theta into cosine squared theta gives me cosine of theta. Minus 2 into 2 goes 1 time. Cosine of theta into cosine of theta goes 1 time. So it's equal to 1. Then looking at my second 2 terms, again, if this middle term is negative, take out a negative. And then notice that they both have a factor of 3. So I'm going to take out a negative 3. And when I do that, I divide both of these by negative 3. So negative 3 into negative 3 cosine of theta, the negative 3's cancel. I'm left with cosine of theta. And then negative into positive gives me negative, and 3 goes into 3 1 time. Now I have 2 terms. And what's common to those 2 terms? Cosine of theta minus 1. And what am I left with? Well, if I factor out the cosine of theta minus 1, if I take it out of the first term, I'm left with 2 cosine of theta. Minus, if I take it out of the second term, I'm left with minus 3. So here I get cosine of theta minus 1 equals 0, or 2 cosine of theta minus 3 equals 0. So if I have cosine of theta, add 1 to both sides, equals 1. And then over here, I'm going to add the 3. 2 cosine of theta equals 3. Change the side, change the signs, and then divide both sides by 2. All right, so now I'm going to split it into 2 parts. So on this one, again, when the cosine or the sine of theta is equal to 1 or 0, we're looking at our points on our axes. So over 1 up 0, over 0 up 1, over negative 1 up 0, over 0 down 1. So here the cosine of theta is the same as the x-coordinate. So where is our x-coordinate equal to 1? So that would be right here. So your answer would be 0 degrees or 0 radians. Okay? So that is your answer for this half of the equation. Now on this one, notice the cosine of theta is equal to 3/2. Now this would be my opposite, and this would be my hypotenuse. Notice that in this case, the opposite is longer than the hypotenuse, and that is impossible because the hypotenuse is always the longest side. So also, if you just try it on your calculator, you will see, if I do inverse cosine, first I'm going to have to go 3 divided by 2 equals, and then do inverse cosine. And it gives me error because this is impossible. And so there's no answer here. So my only good answer for this problem is 0. So that one's a little bit different. Now, if you are not good at factoring, you can also use the Pythagorean theorem. So let me go over here and just work the same problem. And we're not going to work all the trig part. We'll just work the algebra part here. If I have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And I want to use the quadratic formula to solve it. Remember, the quadratic formula is x is equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, right? So in this problem, we have the A is 2, the B is -5, and the C is 3. So the A is the number in front of the square term, the B is the number in front of just the cosine of theta, and then the C is the number that's all by itself, the unit term. And so here's A, B, and C. So this would be, so here my x is cosine of theta would be equal to the opposite of B, so that would be opposite of -5 would be 5, plus or minus the square root of -5 squared minus 4 times A, which is 2, times C, which is 3, sorry, all over 2 times A, which is 2. So this gives me 5 plus or minus. Now, when you can just plug this into your calculator is probably the easiest way to do this. But notice when I square -5, it becomes negative times negative is positive 25 minus 4 times 2 is 8 times 3 is 24 over 4. So this gives me 5 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 4. Well, the square root of 1 is 1. So if I do 5 plus 1 over 4, I get 6 over 4, which gives me 3/2, which is the part that I got here. And if I do 5 minus 1 over 4, that would be 4 over 4, which is 1. And that's what I got here. So then I would say, this part would say the cosine of theta is equal to 3/2, or this part would say the cosine of theta is equal to 1. And then I would work it from there the same way that I did up here. So if you're not good at factoring, you can use the quadratic formula. We're going to go ahead and stop here. I've got 2 more problems that I want to show you, but I'm going to do those, or a couple more problems, but I'm going to do those in another part.